This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I welcome back Paul Niland, CEO of Lifeline Ukraine, the suicide helpline service in the country, to reflect on a year of this terrible war. Paul chats about his experience of Ukraine in the 20 years of living there, the relationship with Russia, the political environment in the country, and the unlikely rise to power of Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedian and star of the TV series Servant of the People. He also chats about the impact of the war on Lifeline Ukraine and how he and his team have coped with the huge increased calls from people in severe distress. Let's hear from Paul. Hey Paul, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Greg, it's always good to talk to you, and I'm well, thank you. I'm just enjoying a relaxing weekend.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure not all of them are that relaxing. You're the CEO of Lifeline Ukraine. How are things going there?
We faced incredible challenges because of this war, or this phase of the war. You know, the war didn't start on the 24th of February of last year. The war has been ongoing since 2014, and many of my colleagues, having served since 2014 in the Donbass, they were on the military reserve, and so the day before the all-out invasion came, they were all recalled, and so, you know, then on the 24th itself, like many people across the country, many of my colleagues dispersed and went to different parts of the country to where maybe they'd be safer. Some left the country and are still now based overseas as well. So we're spread out, but nothing has interrupted our delivery of support. We've maintained our operations 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And not only maintained our operations, but the demand for support from Lifeline Ukraine has tripled as well. We used to have around 1,000 calls and chat interactions per month, and now we're at around 3,000 instances of support that we provide per month. So you can see therein, you know, the effect on the mental health of the nation.
And how have you coped with that big increase in calls?
We've coped by having a super team who are dedicated to the work that they do. You know, in many countries, their suicide prevention hotlines operate on a voluntary basis. Our team has been a professional team. They're paid for their time. But anybody who goes to work as a volunteer or as a professional at a suicide prevention hotline, that's a special person. You know, and again, it's their dedication, it's their loyalty to the mission. That's what keeps us going. They know that we have become an essential form of support for the people of Ukraine, even those that are overseas. In actual fact, around about 8.8% of our interactions are now messages from Ukrainians who are overseas, who, you know, contact the National Ukrainian Suicide Prevention Hotline. So, yeah, we've coped from the one side because the people who I work with are brilliant, but the other way that we had to cope as well was to arrange additional training for our colleagues on the kind of issues that they were going to come up against. So we did a specialized training course on how to help people who are displaced through war. For example, we've done half a dozen such courses over the last 6 months. The last one that we did was how to help and support survivors of sexual assault, which, as we all know, you know, everybody's read the reporting on this. That's one of the war crimes that the Russians have been carrying out everywhere where they've occupied. And, you know, the victims of such horrific brutality are left with scars that will take many, many years to heal. And often they just simply feel that they don't want to live anymore. And so that's something that I knew that we needed to prepare for, and we have.
In the last episode of the Win Happy podcast, Paul, I was talking to one of your neighbours, Darina Gruzdieva, and she's now living in Cork. She fled Ukraine, she fled Kyiv, pretty much just after the war began, nearly a year ago. And it was all escape, 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 just survive. And she found herself in a bedroom in Warsaw, very thankful to be in a safe place, but not being able to get out of bed because she had depression.
Yeah.
And the next leg of her journey brought her to Ireland. And while it was all go, 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 survive, get to another place, that depression stayed with her. Mm-hmm. And she was lucky enough to have some strong people around her. She had a strong host family, Mike and Matilda Morrison, who were very supportive. But she also spoke about her mother, Victoria, who was very, very strong. A lot of people mightn't have that strength around them, and they get to a very, very weak place and they need that support. So I can imagine the need for your services, as well as changing, and you said that, the pure quantity of it. What should people do when they find themselves in that situation?
The example that you gave, you talk about somebody who has support structures around them. And we were working in the summer of last year, I guess it was June and July. We were working with an organization in Slovakia, and the way that they kind of framed what they wanted to try to accomplish was a Ukrainian refugee who is in some kind of hostel or some kind of dormitory who needs support, but maybe doesn't want to speak on the phone because there are other people around. And so with them, we ended up developing a pop-up for our website. And your organization's website has to contain information about what you do, who you are, how you were founded, all that kind of stuff. And what we were saying was, when a person is in immediate need of support, we need to remove all those barriers. And so instead of our pop-up being, do you accept cookies, which is the most common kind of version, ours says, do you need help now? And then there's one live button, which is to begin a call immediately from your mobile phone, or there's another live button, which is to begin a chat immediately. And so in that circumstance that they were talking about of, a refugee in a third country who's looking for support, they can simply go to the website of Lifeline Ukraine, and through that pop-up, they'll be chatting with somebody from my team instantly.
The scars from this are deep and far-reaching. And I was just trying to imagine, and she painted a really, really lovely picture of, a successful girl, 29, renting her own apartment in Kyiv, on a positive career trajectory and everything. And suddenly she finds herself in Fermoy, being 100% dependent on the kindness and the support of other people and another country, and what that must feel like to you as an individual.
I mean, I can see exactly that story. An independent, career-minded person who maybe isn't from the capital, maybe should move to the capital because of the better job opportunities and so on, or just attracted by the life, the vibrancy of being in Kiev itself, because it is a wonderful city. And then, yeah, absolutely, you begin an arduous journey. And I've spoken, I mean, I didn't leave, as you know, I chose to stay here in Ukraine, but I've spoken to many people, foreigners and Ukrainians alike, who've described to me the endless lines at the border when they were trying to get away in the latter part of February. On the 24th of February itself, you know what? The one sound that really struck me, that I heard over and over and over again, it was wheels on suitcases being dragged along tiles. Because we woke up on the morning of the 24th of February to explosions going off everywhere, right? And, the big war had started, and it was certainly, do you know what? I wouldn't say that I was angry. I was upset. I was upset that it had come to this, that this is what is happening to my city. And then, many people who chose to leave, they did so thinking about children first and foremost, and if we're talking about somebody maybe who was from the northern suburbs of Kiev, Irpin and Bucha and places like that, then, people had to escape because the Russians were occupying those areas and destroying them as well with artillery, just, ruining people's homes. And we saw, after the liberation of those areas, we saw the executions of civilians that had been rounded up if they were suspected to have had any part in service to the armed forces, or even if somebody in their family had, fought against the Russians in the invasion of the Donbass since 2014. Those people were simply shot. People who I have a tattoo, right? The Ukrainian state symbol is a trident. And it's everywhere. It's on the cover of passports, and it's on car license plates and everything else. And it's a patriotic symbol. And I have a big tattoo, which is stylized in actual fact in an Irish way, right? I had a friend of mine draw this up for me, sitting in an Irish pub years ago, and I sent him a photograph of like the placemat. And I said, can you work that design, right, where it's all, the curves and the line? Can you work that design into a trident, the state symbol? So he drew it up for me, and I got it done, right? And it's a big piece of art. And people who have tattoos of the Ukrainian state symbol were executed for having a tattoo. So, there were many horrors that people were escaping from. The journeys were themselves logistically very, very difficult. But psychologically, the journey that you're taking is away from everything that you're comfortable with, your apartment where you've surrounded yourself with the things that you like, your friends, your colleagues, your favorite restaurants, all of that is suddenly upended. And your life now is completely different. And when we look at the example that you're talking about, we're talking about one person. But the scale of that problem is that as many as 15 million Ukrainians are displaced because of this war. 15 million people either internally displaced or in third countries, and each of those people has gone through that process that we've just described and has that exact same loss of the familiarity of what their life was.
The one huge thing I got from that conversation was that complicated relationship between Ukraine and Russia. She was speaking herself about having Russian blood and Russian relatives, and she was saying it was like brother fighting brother. And as an outsider who has become an insider, Paul, you've been over there for 20 years, and I know it's really complicated. In the best possible way, could you paint that picture from your perspective during that 20 years and how it changed, over, between 2014, before that, after it, our new president, the president who was an actor, the servant of the people, and how he was perceived and what's happened since? I know it's a big task I'm asking you to do, but can we give it a go?
So the first thing to say is this, there's talk, and now it's very much rejected by Ukrainians, of this idea of brotherly nations, right? But in actual fact, if you went back to prior to 2014, many Ukrainians did certainly have friendships with people in Russia. It was not at all uncommon. I know many Russian people who have lived and worked and made their homes here in Kiev, Russian is a very, very commonly spoken language. The idea that there is a part of Ukraine that is Russian speaking and another part that is Ukrainian speaking is simply nonsense, right? Pretty much everybody here is at least bilingual. Everybody understands both, and your interaction in a service environment. So, for example, you go to a restaurant or a shop or something like that. Your interaction is automatically in Ukrainian. And one of the things that I see now is that you'll have a couple who are sitting and conversing in Russian between themselves. And then a waiter will come over and begin speaking to them in Ukrainian. And they switch to Ukrainian instantly because that's the language they've just been addressed in. And after they've completed their order, or got the bill paid, or whatever it is that they were intending to do, they switch then back to Russian between themselves because that's the language that they've chosen, and nobody cares. Nobody cares what language another person chooses, right? It really does not matter here. But certainly since 2014, when the occupation of Crimea and parts of the Donbass began, and without a shadow of a doubt, massively increased since the all-out war began on the 24th of February, the ties between Ukrainians and Russians that have maybe existed for years and years and years have largely been severed. And I mean, you just talked about brother against brother, right? I can tell you why. And I read an interesting thread on this on Twitter yesterday. And what it is that the people in Russia, they know what's going on. They know that their army, in the name of their country, under the orders of the president that they have allowed to lord over them for 2 decades, right? They know that their army is committing atrocities. They know the destruction of places like Solidar or Vuglidar or Bakhmut or wherever it is, Mariupol, the obvious example. They know about the war crimes that their army are committing. And it's not just that they turn a blind eye to it, they lie about it. They lie, they deny, they claim it's not going on. But as the thread that I read and shared yesterday said, they know it, they discuss it between them, and they're happy to just be in denial publicly. But behind it, they know, and if they're not offering support, sympathy, empathy to those Ukrainians that they've known for many, many years, then I'm sorry, but they're human garbage, and they are ultimately as responsible for the prolongation of this conflict by not getting out there and protesting against what their country is doing in my country. They're responsible. They share responsibility, and it's collective responsibility. And that's why, we can have conversations about why the Russians and the Belarusians, because Belarus is used as a launch pad for attacks, waves of attacks against Ukraine. Russians and Belarusians should not be allowed to compete in the 2024 Olympics in Paris. And in actual fact, because they were occupying 7.2% of Ukraine at that time, they should have been stripped of the hosting rights of the 2018 World Cup as well.
Yeah, we left them at it, didn't we? It was okay. It was a minor crime that didn't disrupt too much of the world. So off with you, lads. We'll just watch from the sidelines.
It's not that it didn't disrupt too much of the world. It's that it was poorly understood as well. This is one of the reasons why, in actual fact, I got into journalism because I could see that there was a gap in explaining what was happening in this country from a Ukrainian perspective. And the first published article that I wrote was a response. Putin had sent, after Crimea but before Donbass, Putin had sent an open letter to the 28 then heads of state or heads of government of the European Union. And it was just full of lies, just full of distortions. And I simply said, I'm going to take this apart line by line. And the editor-in-chief of a newspaper here said, we'd be interested in looking at that, potentially publishing it. And that's how my journalism, that's how my writing began. And, I'm now hundreds of articles later in a variety of publications. And, I've understood things from the perspective of somebody who is living in Ukraine, and I've done my best. It's a part of me playing a role, I guess, and the same goes with sitting down and having chats with people like yourself, Greg. It's me playing a role in enlightening people as to the realities of what Ukraine is like as a country and what has been happening to this country as a result of Russian aggression.
The revolution of dignity, Paul, in 2014, and I know you were there in the middle of everything in Madden, and the victory and the changes that came, or maybe the changes that didn't come after it. Was that a huge shift? Was that a big success, or was it a gradual thing? Was that a gradual change that happened in Ukraine as a result?
The revolution of dignity covered 2013 and 2014. It began on the 21st of November, and Yanukovych fled on the night of the 21st to the 22nd of February. It was early morning on the 22nd of February when he went. And so those 93 days, they were an enormous challenge for the people who participated in those events. And yes, I did. When I say I participated, I saw the Molotov cocktail factories, but I never threw one, right? I saw the human chains of people who were passing broken up bricks to the guys that would throw them over the lines of where the riot police were, I never threw a brick, right? But I was there, and I was there to witness all of this. It was a monumental event, and it ended sadly with the loss of 100 lives. And because the victory came at such a high price, civil society since then has pushed the authorities, whether it was the Yatsenyuk government, the Poroshenko presidency, the beginning of the Zelensky era and the reforms that he was talking about. One of the first things that he was talking about, turbocharging reform. He had an absolute majority of his party in the parliament, and so they were able to move quite quickly on things that they wanted to do. And so the reforms have been in stages. We're finally getting around to making a serious attempt at reforming the judiciary. In my mind, that's one of the things that should have come sooner. But, reforming things like government procurement and the way that works, and that used to line the pockets of connected people to the tunes of billions and billions and billions of dollars. It doesn't work that way anymore. We now have a transparent online system where government tenders are put out and anyone can bid on them, right? The reform of the police service was also a big deal as well. There was an interesting period, actually, when Yanukovych fled on the 22nd, there was all of a sudden a vacuum here in Kiev, right? And whereas we'd been used to this constant presence of police everywhere, and particularly riot police in certain parts of the city as well, all of a sudden there were none. Right. So with Yanukovych, lots of members of his cabinet also fled as well, including the Interior Ministry. And so there's no orders being thrown down the chain of command. And, the president has gone. What are we going to do now? And it was bewildering, right? Because you've been so used to this, and you imagine like the emotional involvement that you have if you've participated in 93 days of revolution with all of the events that came with that. And then all of a sudden we've won. What do you do? What do you do? But yeah, the changes that we've had, the creation of offices like the Business Ombudsman's Office, where a company can turn to an independent person or an independent group if they feel that they're being pressured by authorities, or if somebody's trying to extort a bribe for them or something like that. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, lots has been done. But we can go back actually to the Orange Revolution and look at what that brought about for Ukraine. What triggered the Orange Revolution is the kind of election fraud that Russia, it's normal for them, right? The people who run the polling stations in Russia believe that it is their responsibility to deliver the right result for the incumbent party. They think that's actually what their job is. And it doesn't matter that it's completely fraudulent, right? That it's not a true reflection of the will of the people. But the Orange Revolution began because of those same kind of tactics of ballot box stuffing and manipulation of electronically declared numbers and so on. And it became something that was very, very important to Ukrainians. I will go and vote, and my vote will be counted, and it will not be messed with, And that led to open competition between political rivals. And, the free press that we also have here enabled investigations of politicians who were up to no good. And so the Ukrainian voters would read this and they would kick one bunch out, or in the case of Yanukovych, they actually decided to allow him back into the presidency, but then get thoroughly fed up of the blatant cronyism and corruption that surrounded him and say, screw this, we're taking to the streets now. Like, this will not stand. We will not go down that path. And, Yanukovych was increasingly becoming an authoritarian, changing the constitution to give himself more powers. And, it was, I just talked about the changes to public procurement, right? So Yanukovych's son was awarded $2.3 billion in state tenders in 2013, right? So when we're standing on Maidan And, we know that. We know that that's what we're fighting against. I wrote an article actually called 10 Days That Shook Ukraine. And it covers a period from the 16th until the 26th of January 2014. And on the 16th of January, the parliament passed what were swiftly dubbed the dictatorship laws. And the next Sunday, the 19th, when we were all gathered on Maidan, as we did every single Sunday, I mean, I was there pretty much every single day, in fact, but the Sundays were the big weekly meetings with hundreds of thousands in attendance. And in the wake of the dictatorship laws, the protesters went around the corner to where there was a roadblock, which blocked access to the government quarter, where the cabinet of ministers is, where the parliament is, and fighting broke out there. And I was there on that street during those street battles, and I remember speaking to one older lady. There was a constant soundtrack because people were banging sticks against oil drums or banging stones against pieces of metal railings or lampposts or signposts or whatever. And this dum 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 dum. It was all the time. And I spoke to one of the ladies who was on the street and a part of this orchestra making this noise. And I said to her, I said, "Why are you here?" And she's like, and she points over to where the authorities are. And she's like, those bastards, they are stealing our money. They were stealing our country. They're stealing our children's future. And we have to stand up now. And it was determined and brave, ordinary people, men and women like that, and it makes me laugh, actually, that this still gets under Putin's skin. That he still talks about an illegal coup in Kiev, in 2014. Nah. A revolution with just goals is a very, very legitimate action. And that's exactly what we did. It was a revolution. It was bloody hard fought. And the cost was huge. But the payoffs down the road, I mean, sadly and unfortunately, the fact that we are an example of a reforming democracy on the doorstep of Russia is one of the main reasons why Putin is fighting this war against us now, right? He cannot let the example of Ukraine's revolutions and tackling corruption lead Russians to thinking, hang on a second, maybe we want some of that, right? So therefore we have war. But the result for everyday life here in Ukraine, things have got markedly better, measurably better. The mood, with the obvious caveat of we are a country at war, but the mood of people and how they interact with each other is better. You don't expect, if you're stopped by the police, you don't expect to be automatically asked for a bribe. There is actually now a public servant that you're interacting with who is interested, in fact, in resolving whatever problem it is that you've come across, right? And yeah, the changes are huge. And I saw some idiot on a British TV program the other day spouting out some nonsense about, I don't understand why we're helping Ukraine, blah blah blah. It was well known to be a corrupt country. Right? Well, yes, that's why we had a revolution, because of the corruption. And we've been finding ways to shine light on that and going into these dark corners and closing these avenues ever since, and that is a part of the change that I'm a witness to, that I feel privileged to be a witness to. That's why I live in this country. It's an interesting, exciting, and developing place.
It sounds like you're describing an awakening, and at a particular point in time, people realized that they had the power to change things.
Mm-hmm.
And, going from dictatorship and that, kind of bleak communism, going to a democracy, it's not a magic wand. That those things don't change overnight. And there's obviously growing pains. And I think that's what a lot of people are talking about with these growing pains. The president, Volodymyr Zelensky, when was the first time that he came onto your radar?
So I don't watch local television. I rarely consume local news. And so I really didn't know. I mean, his 95 Petit Quartal show that he used to do, I mean, that was wildly popular. And then the Servant of the People TV series that he made, as a precursor, if you like, laying down what would be eventually his effort to actually assume the office in real life. I didn't know much of him until he announced that he was running for president. And at that time, there were several other potential candidates. I remember I was in a TV studio here in Ukraine, and there were at the time three candidates with their hat in the ring. There was Poroshenko, Zelensky, and Yulia Tymoshenko. And there were four guests in the studio, one of whom was for Poroshenko, another one was for Zelensky and change, and another one was like, I think Yulia's got experience in politics, et cetera, et cetera. And I sat there as the devil's advocate, against them all. I don't like any of them in actual fact. But, at the end of the day, I'm not a Ukrainian citizen yet. And so I don't have a vote. And when it came down to the 2-horse race between Zelensky and Poroshenko, I basically dropped out of the domestic Ukrainian political discussion at that point. It was for other people to have that. And it became quite toxic as well. But, I talked earlier on about his party having a majority and then being able to form a government by themselves, not needing a coalition. And the kind of turbocharging program that they were attempting to enact at the time, there were many mistakes in it. Things were not thought through properly. There was contradictions between what they wanted to do and existing Ukrainian law. There were all kinds of, the pebbles under the stream. They were inexperienced, right? They came to power with no government experience, and governing is hard. And Zelensky's popularity ratings prior to this phase of the war had dropped below the majority level. But his actions since the 24th of February, and one of his first public statements was, people were offering to set up a government in exile, move him to Western Ukraine or to another country or whatever. And his reaction was, I don't need a ride, I need ammo, right? And he began broadcasting to the country on a daily basis. And the fact that he stayed, the fact that he intended to, together with his team, right? And there was a very good series of 3 long articles on the Washington Post about last summer sometime, actually around Independence Day, because I remember what I was doing on Independence Day. These 3 articles, long reads, really laid out like the inner workings of the Zelensky team, including the defense minister, including the head of security, internal security, and and the head of the presidential administration as well, Andrei Yermak, what their reaction was to the full-scale invasion. And they've done something that few in the West predicted would be possible. And they have the country united behind them at the moment as well, And I say at the moment because I was reading commentary recently saying, like, let's say the war ends this year and Zelensky's got another year left on his term. There is nothing to say that Ukrainians will not decide to kick him out. And yes, okay, we will be victorious. We will defeat Russia. And in large part, thank you very much, President Zelensky, and the people that, you had coalescing around you. But if Ukrainians decide that there is a better candidate, and maybe it would be a candidate who's going to say, I'm experienced in furthering reform and furthering the path of European integration or something like that, then Ukrainians can simply say, yeah, that's the next guy or woman, and they're perfectly ready to do it as well. So yeah, he's a figure that the nation has united around, and his leadership is absolutely worthy of that. But who knows what's going to happen in the future? We're a democracy.
And in the eyes of Ukrainians, did he become a new person on the 24th of February, taking on a new role, and that lens that everyone looked at him through just absolutely transformed?
I think it's not just in the eyes of Ukrainians, but it's you can see it. He changed. So it's not a matter of perception. He changed. And this 12 months, Greg, has been exceptionally difficult for all of us. right? And we've all aged. We've all got a few more wrinkles. The black bags under the eyes are visible on everybody, right? And when I say, we're all affected, when you hear snapshots of conversations, maybe, there was a period when I didn't have an office and I was working out of a coffee shop, and you would hear the conversations that were going on around you, and it's all about supporting the war effort in one way or another, or reaching out to family, friends that you're concerned about, or hearing of needs of a particular military unit for night vision goggles or whatever it might be, or vehicles, right? And launching a crowdfunder for them, or volunteering, as one close friend of mine did for many, many months, volunteering to be translating news output that's coming out of Ukraine, so that the English language world has more information about what's happening here and what the daily realities are, right? I mean, and I see one of my roles, and there's my professional role as the head of Lifeline Ukraine and how we needed to adapt that. But again, as a journalist, I see it that my role is to help people to understand what is happening here and what is likely to happen here and what is the mood here, and what is going to be the effects of this war, not just on Ukraine, but on the wider region, right? Because it certainly is. This is a moment in history that is going to lead to, it has already led to, if you look at the Eurasian Union, this attempt to counter the EU that Putin created, that consists of the former members of the Soviet Union. We're talking about the Central Asian countries, and you can see that whereas traditionally they would be an ally or on Russia's side or whatever, none of them have publicly come out in any way to back or support what Putin is doing in Ukraine. So that union that he created, the only active ally that he has from that is Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko, right? The only one. All the rest of them. Kyrgyzstan, we have places here, they're called points of invincibility, right? And they're tents that are heated, and where you can go and you can get the light is on, it's running from a generator, there's a Starlink terminal so that there's internet access, there's free tea, and it's a place where people can go and warm up and charge their devices and all the rest of it. Kyrgyzstan has now built 4 of these things, right? And they're called yurts of invincibility, right? And the only other suppliers or allies that Putin has got that we know of is North Korea providing ammunition and Iran supplying missiles and drones, right? And even they are both denying it. They won't, even those despots in North Korea and Iran won't publicly say, yeah, we're supporting what Russia is doing to Ukraine. And, we recently learned as well that there's credible evidence that China has been covertly supplying stuff to Putin as well, including arms, including weapons, and so on and so on. I mean, that's the axis that we're fighting against, right? And, the only other, I guess, public display of support for Putin would be from Assad in Syria, because Putin came and saved his ass, right? The civil war was likely to overturn the Assad regime until Putin went in and decided to shore up that dictator and that brutal monster. So, this is an enormous moment in history, and the ramifications for what the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian people behind them, the ramifications for what they will achieve, including the demise of the Putin regime, it has enormous proportions and ripple effects that are global.
I had a huge concern, Paul, that Ukraine would disappear off the news waves. Mm-hmm. And it did to a degree. It wasn't that full-on thing that it was at the very, very beginning. But it's still there. And Zelensky, I must say, as an international ambassador, he keeps pumping it in his visit to the UK and his visit to the US. In our local newspapers, our national newspapers, we heard about the tanks being authorized from Germany and the tanks being authorized from America. and that creeps into our conversations. But, you know, people saying, yeah, that's great news. That's great news. It's still topical, and he's done a great job in keeping Ukraine relevant and the whole world helping Ukraine. How would you describe this phase of the war?
So the period of time that I will say actually that Ukraine dipped out of the news was from 2014 until 2022, the 24th of February. Many people simply weren't aware that there was an active war being fought on a daily basis. You know, there were clashes along the front lines in the Donbass, and that was sad. And what's more than sad is that it has taken this phase of the war, the all-out attack of all of Ukraine, for people to pay attention, to really understand what Ukraine has been going through. Zelensky has done an excellent job, and you mentioned like the trips that he's taken in person, including to the United States and to the heart of Europe as well as the UK. But he's actually been addressing national parliaments whenever he's had the opportunity to do so around the world, including in Asia, including many countries. And what he's exceptionally good at is tuning the message. And so his people around him, his team, his advisors, his speechwriters, they'll look at the history of whoever it is he's talking to, right? The Japanese parliament, for example, and draw parallels with their history and events that have changed the direction of their nations, right? Use that as a way of helping people to understand on a much deeper personal way what it is that Ukraine is going through right now. His style, it's really interesting, and you can see that his background as an actor is something that helps him to deliver these speeches and do it in a very impactful way. But mostly I think it's effective because it comes from the heart. You know, this is an existential war for Ukraine. This is a war for the very existence of our country. And I say our country, but again, like let's talk about the global ramifications. Had Ukraine been swallowed up, had they managed to overrun the capital to install a puppet government, which was their initial goal, they intended to do that in a matter of days. Had they done that, then there would have been an awful culling of civil society here. People would have been exterminated for patriotic tattoos, for being involved in anti-corruption reforms, for having fought in the Russia's war in the Donbass in that early phase. But what would have followed that? What would have followed that would have been then the use of Ukraine's resources, including human resources, for further attacks and for further imperial goals of the Putin regime. And it would have included Moldova. They've been talking about this openly for the last few days. Like it would have included Poland. They have historical grievances there. It would have included the Baltic states, which are obviously, as well as Poland, NATO members. And again, utilizing captured Ukrainian resources to do just that. That the war would have expanded. It would have gone further if they'd managed to capture us and take us over. And again, that's why Zelensky is so impassioned with the pleas that he makes, because of the nature of this war and the fact that it is a war against all of Ukraine and against Ukrainian culture and against the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian statehood. That's what Putin went to war to end.
Yeah, in a way, when we hear that phrase, servant of the people, we think about Ukraine. But I think he's a servant to all people. When we reflect on the corruption of Johnson, the corruption of Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, he really is what we needed, what the world needed at this moment in time to kind of stand up against all of that. And Donald and his quid pro quo and trying to bribe Zelensky with, an exchange of military favors for political favors to himself. Mm-hmm. This phase of the war, Paul, how would you describe it?
Exhausting and debilitating and harrowing. I have so many friends who are on the front lines. They are actively repelling this invasion of our country, and I daily have a dread that I will learn about losing somebody close to me. That is exactly the same for all of us. You know, many of our friends who decided on the 24th of February to abandon their former lives and to take up arms and go to be a part of what will ultimately be Ukraine's victory. We all know many, many people who have done exactly that. And the daily awful anticipation of hearing terrible news, you know, that affects you. But at the same time, what we're witnessing from those people that we know and love and all of those who are maybe anonymous to us, what we're witnessing from them is something really, really quite incredible. Like the acts of bravery, the skillfulness with which they are fighting this war. Like, I mean, you saw the rapid advance through the territory of the Kharkiv Oblast once the offensive got underway, and they just went at a clip and they moved. And we were watching the maps, and, you know, I mean, it was amazing what they were accomplishing through grit, determination, patriotism, and an absolute determination to ensure that Ukrainian citizens must be liberated and cannot be left under Russian occupation. You know, we're witnessing heroic things, witnessing military strategy being played out through the long term, the suffocation of supply lines to the city of Kherson that meant that the Russian occupation of that city had to come to an end, right? And you know, it was a long game of patience to destroy the Antonovsky Bridge, and with each time that bridge, that supply route into the city of Kherson was hit, it was a psychological blow to the Russian occupiers as well, because they knew that like their reinforcements aren't coming, they're not getting ammunition supplies, you know, their escape route is being shut down, right? And what we will continue to witness, and you know, there is the way that this war is fought is Russia uses their heavy artillery to destroy settlements in the east that they want to capture, as we're currently seeing in Bakhmut, as we've recently seen in Solidar, as we see in Crimea as well. But Ukraine's war aims in the south of the country are to destroy the Russian ability to continue to fight. So what we're seeing is we're seeing long-range strategic strikes on ammunition dumps, on railway intersections, on troop concentrations, on barracks. And so that softening up or shaping of the battlefield is something that we have already been witnessing for several months in the South. And as I said in another interview that I did recently, what we will witness this spring is going to be the liberation of cities on the Azov coast that have been occupied since late February and early March of last year. Cities, the name of Melitopol is one that you're going to be seeing as a part of your news broadcasts probably 2 to 3 months from now, because Melitopol is one of the places where the battlefield is being shaped and where the Ukrainian army is preparing to launch a counteroffensive. And when they do, and when they take Berdyansk as well, the next city over, which is also on the Azov coast, the land bridge to Crimea that Putin built from February and March of last year, it is now broken. And with that broken, really, Putin has achieved nothing in this phase of the war other than the destruction of anywhere where they've occupied or where they try to occupy, you know? And what we have to get on with is not thinking about the situation in Russia post-defeat and how things are going to unfold there. What we have to look at is we have to look at the rebuilding of our country and building it back in a better way, in a greener way, in a more intelligently planned way. And moving towards more European norms or fully accepting and embracing European norms is going to dictate a large part of that planning as well. And that's what I'm looking forward to. Yes, this phase of the war has been horrible for many, many, many reasons and incredibly difficult. But the rebuilding that's going to come, the rejuvenation of Ukraine, that's going to be something that's going to be joyous to behold and participate in.
It's clear that Ukraine will not be beaten. That is just not going to happen. And it's also clear that the world and the allies are going to make sure that that's the case. There's obviously a gap between being more aggressive against Russia, that everyone's tiptoeing around the place. What will bring it to an end, Paul, in your perspective, with your understanding of it? How can you see this finishing?
Well, I mean, as I just laid out, you can see the military strategy for breaking the land bridge to Crimea already unfolding. And again, when that is gone, Putin will have achieved nothing in this war, nothing strategic, right? I mean, his idea was not only the land bridge to Crimea, but also to take Nikolaev and Odessa oblasts and to completely cut Ukraine off from not just the Azov Sea, but the Black Sea too, and then to connect Russia to Transnistria, which is a Russian enclave that they created more than 20 years ago on Moldovan territory bordering Ukraine. And they wanted to link all of that up and cut off the rest of Ukraine. But the land bridge to Crimea was necessary because Putin's 2014 land grab of Crimea was ill-advised. There is no way, it is a peninsula physically attached to Ukraine. So without supply from the mainland Ukraine, there's no way of supplying that territory. And yes, Putin did also build the bridge, which we despise, and it was a day of celebration
when it got bombed.
when that bridge got whacked, and the fact of doing it once, it is a message to the Kremlin that nothing is off limits. Crimea is Ukraine. Crimea will be returned to Ukraine, and if we choke off, as well as the land bridge, if we choke off the rail and road bridge across the Kerch Strait, then there is no way of supplying anything to Crimea other than through boats and ferries. And the Russian occupation of the peninsula becomes a long-term impossibility. And so that's how it ends. That's how it ends. It ends. It's an important step in breaking that land bridge. And psychologically, again, that's going to have a huge impact on the way that the Russians feel about this war. But the point of that is that ultimately that is a precursor to the liberation of Crimea itself, and that's the end of the war. Whether the hot war that's being fought on the mainland of Ukraine is going to come to some kind of an end, and then Crimea is returned as a part of the whatever end process there is, or whether it's retaken militarily as a continuation of Ukraine's war effort, I don't know. But Ukraine will return to its internationally recognized borders, and then that's done. Well, I say then that's done. The other really important element, the absolute essential, is justice. There will be no peace until there is justice. The people who ordered the initial crime of aggression against Ukraine, there will be a special tribunal that is going to try them for their crimes. It's going to analyze what they did, when they did it, who gave which orders, and it's going to sentence people to whatever they deserve. And the individual perpetrators of war crimes, they must also stand before justice as well. And the other part of justice, and I guess this is one of the things that is a negotiated outcome, is the reparations that Russia will have to pay to Ukraine to pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine. Russia obviously is responsible, so Russia obviously has to pay. And it's good to see that countries are creating legal precedents for the transfer of seized Russian assets to Ukraine for reconstruction. And they're doing it right now. That direction is already very, very clear as well.
And I did hear you answer my question about how the war finished, but I guess in my head, I can see absolute success in pushing the occupiers back out of the country, and restoring your borders. But I can see Putin still being quite happy to keep bombing and bombing and bombing indiscriminately from the sanctuary of their own borders, with the whole world being afraid of attacking back. We mentioned earlier this idea of an awakening in Ukraine. On any planet, can you see an equal awakening happening in Russia, with mothers and sisters and brothers deciding, okay, enough is enough. We've witnessed enough of our young men being slaughtered at the hands of Putin. And I know the propaganda isn't really filtering through at this moment in time. Or as you were saying earlier, maybe that they just don't even want to believe that pill. Can you see a similar awakening? And will that be the real end of it? Where
It's interesting that you asked me this question, because I foresaw exactly that in the first days of this war. And the very first article that I wrote, and I wrote it on the 26th of February, it was published on the 28th of February, was predicting, number one, the Russian war dead, the number of Russians killed in this war is going to be enormous, right? I mean, it was an absolute certainty. And that this would cause some kind of uprising of the wives and the mothers of, who are now, they've lost their children or they're now widows, and that they would rise up and say, no, like this is, no. And I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong. I was right on the first part. Obviously, the numbers of Russian war dead is closing in on 140,000 now. 140,000. They only lost 15,000 in 10 years in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, right? 15,000 in 10 years and 140,000 in less than a year, right? And the numbers over the last couple of days, today's 910, yesterday was 1,130, right? They're enormous losses, should really have an effect on the country. But, I remember a clip, obviously a propaganda clip, but, it was a guy who had lost his son, right? I'm a father. I adore my son. I would do absolutely anything for him. I love him to pieces, even though he's a big lump and he's not a boy anymore. He's a man now, but he's my son, right? And I love him dearly. And there's this guy on TV with his brand new white Lada, and it's like, well, my son got killed, but we used the compensation to buy a new car, and white was his favorite color, so that's the one that, that's what he would have chosen. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, there's no grief, there's no remorse, there's no sorrow, there's nothing. There's nothing, and there was a recent, again, another bit of propaganda which looks to have been staged with fur coats that were stolen from Kherson, in actual fact, when Kherson was occupied. But a bunch of women standing around going, well, our husbands have died, but we've been given these fur coats. Aren't we happy?
Happy days.
happy days, right? I mean, maybe your husband was an asshole. Maybe you're glad that he's gone. I don't know. But it's astonishing to me, as someone who values human life, and that's maybe why I professionally do what I do. But I think it is the thing of the highest value that there is, a single human life, right? But apparently, the Russians really don't care. And is there going to be a turning point? I guess there's going to be a turning point again when there's been no strategic gains from the war, because the land bridge has been knocked out. We've liberated another city in Melitopol, and you can see that people are happy to have Ukrainian control return. And at that point, when they look at that and they go, so 160,000 people have died for nothing. Maybe, Greg, that is going to be enough for them to finally say, what the fuck was this all about, right?
As your fellow countryman Sting sang, that the Russians love their children too. Let's hope they do. And let's hope there is a tipping point. And you were right, but maybe your timing was a little bit out. So You're on the Win Happy podcast. Now tell me very quickly, how are the guitar lessons going?
Do you know what? I've actually not played for about 2 months. I've had a problem with my shoulder, and it's like any kind of vibration. When I use my beard trimmer, because it's battery operated, like I get this tingling in my arm, and obviously playing the guitar, you've got a lot of vibration coming back at you. And I was with a good friend of mine 2 evenings ago, and he said to me, he said, I had exactly the same thing. He said, and it's all about posture. He said, and I changed the way that I sit. And I said to him, actually, my couch is rather slouchy. And I've since rearranged my cushions. And already within 48 hours of making that change, I'm getting less of this numbness, this pins and needles in my arm. And so I'm very grateful to my buddy for having given me that advice, and hopefully I'll get back to playing soon. But I was enjoying playing "Where Did the Children Play" by Cat Stevens, and still the one I Want by Shania Twain, and a few songs by James. Getting Away with It is one of their top songs. There's a lovely song called "Protect Me" as well by James that I was enjoying playing. So. And I was talking with my guitar teacher the other day, actually, and I said to him, I said, I really miss it. I want to get back to it. And so hopefully the recovery of my right shoulder continues at a decent pace, and I'll be playing in a day or two.
Well, I've got a chiropractor that I go to see, and 15, 20 minutes, a few manipulations, and a sore knee disappears or a tight back disappears. It's amazing. So get that sorted out and take that guitar out again. Paul, I know it's a Sunday. You've got plans. You're going for cocktails later. Have a lovely day. I'm glad to see you still surviving. And we will see the back of all of this. Thanks a million for the friendship and for enlightening our listeners about what's going on over there. Thank you so much.
I'm happy always to contribute to a better understanding of the situation in Ukraine, and happy always to chat with you, my friend, as well.
Yeah, take it easy, Paul.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.